Thank you, the full panel. That was an excellent starting discussion for the evening. At this time, it's my honor and privilege to introduce our keynote featured guest this evening. He is someone, I'm originally from Texas. I grew up in White House, just south of Tyler, so he is someone I knew of and have gotten to know better over recent years, obviously in his recent campaign, but even a bit before that, he's I think a principled leader that I greatly respect, and am honored to have him here this evening to have a discussion with us. Colin Allred's story, I think, is a uniquely Texas story. A fourth-generation Texan, Colin was born and raised in Dallas by a single mom who was a public school teacher. My mom, also a public school teacher, and often worked two jobs just to make ends meet. With help from his aunt and uncle, he and his mom moved to North Dallas, where his mom and aunt and uncle still lived just a street apart. When not at a YMCA camp, he often spent summers visiting his grandmother in Brownsville, where his grandfather was a customs officer after fighting in the Pacific with the Navy in World War II. Other parts of Colin's story, obviously his service in the United States Congress for the 32nd District, his time in the NFL as a linebacker for the Titans, and also the work as a civil rights attorney, fighting for those whose rights maybe not be vindicated as easily as others, and making sure that the Constitution works for everyone, I think is a noble cause wherever it is fought. And obviously with his recent campaign, first-time Senate candidate here in Texas, getting the Democratic nomination and running an excellent campaign against Senator Cruz. We'll talk a little bit about that this evening. But without further ado, it's my honor and privilege to welcome Mr. Colin Allred to the panel.
Okay, mic check.
I think we're on. Maybe we won't squeak through. Colin, first of all, thanks so much for joining us. It was my ambition to get you on to a principal's first stage in the discussion with our folks. I know a lot of folks wanted to hear from you and talk to you, particularly here in Dallas. So I know I speak for everyone in the room that we're just really appreciative that you're here and for the work that you did in Congress, but also over the course of the campaign. I kind of want to just start there. There's a lot I want to ask you and talk about. We'll get into foreign policy, but I mean, you're just off the heels of this, first time statewide run. Texas is a big state to run statewide in. There's a ton of challenges for a first time statewide candidate. I in college interned for some of these candidates. Interned for Tom Leppert when he ran for Republican Senate. It is grind. You got to drive all over the state. There's no easy way to go about it, and to really pound the pavement. I mean, you really got to just go meet and press the flesh with all the Texans from east to west to down at the border. What did you learn in that experience? And what was your big takeaway from that campaign?
Yeah, thank you for having me, Heath. And I think it's just great that y'all have a volunteer organization that's done all of this. It's remarkable. I was talking to your wife about how y'all do, advertise, and just people have come because they want to be part of something that's valuable. And I think that's something really to note, because there is a lot of power in our individual voices combining to get things done. I've always just been a big believer in that. This is my first time doing anything since the campaign, like in front of people, and I wouldn't do it with some partisan group. I'd like to do is something like this. And so I also want to acknowledge the service of the previous panel. What a bunch of just incredible American heroes we just heard from. Listen, it was a tough election, right? And, I think that in a lot of ways, it was an election that was dominated by things that were not about the candidates. In a weird way, there was a malaise, there was things that kind of, an atmosphere that was difficult to punch through. Listen, you read my bio. I grew up in a household where every dollar counted, right? Where we would swipe my mom's debit or our teacher's credit union, teacher's credit union, and Tom Thumb, and if it went through, we'd be like, yes, let's get out before they figure us out, So I get it when costs go up and how hard that could be on working families. But I'll tell you what, folks selected Donald Trump so they could buy groceries, not Greenland. You know what I mean? And I say that because I do think that in so many ways what the election was about is not what we've seen since then. It's been about retribution, revenge, some kind of nonsense, about taking over territory, right? And deeply un-American, in my opinion. And I say that not from a partisan perspective. I always hope for the President of the United States to do well. I pray for the President of the United States every single time. And it's a job that it's hard to imagine how difficult that would be. But I also think that what we've seen is a use of that office to abuse the Constitution, and we've not seen a response from the checks and balances of the founders put in place, except for the courts. But that's not the main balance. Article 1 of the Constitution is the Congress. And our founders warned us about factionalism. That's what was their term, but what we call partisanship. Because they were worried about a demagogue rising. And they were worried about that if we split into factions that were more important than our identity as Americans, or that our fealty to the Constitution, that we could fall. And that's what I am deeply worried about now. But you asked about the campaign. I'll just tell you, there are so many decent people across this state. And one of the things you get to see when you campaign statewide is just how many wonderful people there are all over. We're a state with 30 million people. My family's from the Valley. That's where my mom and dad were born and raised. My grandmother lived, as you said. My grandfather was a customs officer there, just serving in the Navy, Master Chief. And he was some inshore ships and some island hopping campaigns. Came back and joined the Customs Department. And the Valley is a totally different place from North Texas. East Texas is where you're from. Totally different. But there are some common threads. And I still believe that we're fundamentally decent people. That we are people that believes in goodness to each other. I think that most Texans will help out their neighbor, help out the person down the street. But leadership matters. And when leaders tell you that the enemy is next door, or the enemy is within, and you unleash Pandora's box in that way, you can see as something set back from those values. But I like the question that was asked, and I'm sorry, Heath, is a long answer. The question was asked about what to do. Because I don't think that democracy is just about elections. Democracy doesn't just stop when you press the button or punch the ballot. You have to hold your elected officials accountable in every way you can. And collective action is the best way to do that. And whether that's working through an organization like this, or when I initially ran for Congress back in 2017, a whole bunch of organizations formed here in North Texas that didn't exist just months before. You're sort of the part of that story too, in your own way. And it was just people deciding that, hey, listen, I'm going to have a neighborhood organization, and we're going to call ourselves something weird. And we're called the Funky East Dallas Democrats. And they called themselves the Feds. And I told them, listen, some parts of Dallas don't knock on the door and say you're with the Feds. You know what I mean? They formed these organizations themselves. It doesn't have to be partisan either. I do think that in a lot of ways, we've seen those lines blur. I was campaigning with Liz Cheney, who's a friend of mine, in the last election. And Liz, when I first got to Congress, I thought Liz was, not, let's just say, I was jealous in some ways of how effective she was, but I thought, Liz is not it. And looking back on it, listen, what values do we share? Fealty to the Constitution, a belief in the rule of law, a belief in the meritocratic system generally, a belief in American exceptionalism, right? But there's something special about this country. This is the only country ever founded on an idea, right? That power not derived from a king or through blood and sword, but through words and rights, right? And now we find ourselves on the same side of the ledger. And so, to me, it's the time for every American, dig deep, find ways that you can be involved in your local community. When you see what's going on in Washington or in Austin, you also know there's going to be a tremendous need at home. Your food bank is going to need you. Your school system is going to need you. All these support structures that we sometimes take for granted now need us more than ever, as they'll receive less funding or uncertain funding. This is a time for us all to step up.
And I'll just add, just from a principles first perspective, just to give a little bit of hope. I know it sounds like nobody's listening, but you are not alone in that frustration and that just, is anybody listening? I mean, Colin said it. We are a pretty lean operation here. We are not going out and spend a lot of money to try to get people into this room. You guys came here because you heard about us, and that is happening around the country. And we're doing these dinners just as quickly and as fast as we can. And I'll tell you, just the act of convening like this in sufficient number and filling rooms gets the attention, like Colin was saying, of the elected official. They don't expect us to show up. They expect the loud radical fringes to show up in large numbers and control the primary electorate, but they don't expect us to show up like this. So just showing up in this way can raise a flag and bring others to us, and we're seeing that at least at Principles First. So I just think you're doing it now to some degree, which is helpful. Colin, I want to go back to obviously the theme of the evening is foreign policy and the challenges that America faces on the world stage. One, foreign policy adjacent issues, particularly in the state of Texas, is the issue of immigration. I'm curious your thoughts on this issue in particular. I mean, this is one obviously that was central to Trump's campaign, and I think the Republican campaign generally was, we need to get the border under control. We need to reduce the incidence of immigration. And the numbers have come down generally since he was elected, I think, just because people are not making the trek as they might. But also we've seen some just horrendous cases of abuse of the Constitution with deportation, categorical deportations of just not even understanding who we're sending away, and in some cases they're legal residents. How do you think about the issue of immigration as it relates to the state of Texas? And, where do we go from here as a state and as a country on this issue when, there is this concern that we need to secure the border, but there's also, as this as a civil rights attorney, there's also the Constitution, and we got to do things the right way. Curious what your thoughts are.
Well, my first thought is that how we treat others isn't about them. It's about you. You can have people who have to have renewal proceedings. That's been going on forever. And you can even ramp that up. But we're a values-based country. And when you do that, you have to do it consistent with those values, or you lose something for yourself. Forget this individual case, or what the merits of the case may be. It's not about that person in this regard. It's about our collective values. And that if it's being done in our name and it's inconsistent with those, then it's wrong. And so, listen, as you said, this was something that was litigated during the campaign. And I was, within my party, one of the voices saying for months before we took any action at the federal level, we've got to do something about this. We had a record number of crossings in December of 2023. more in a month in December than we had in the last year of the Obama presidency, right? It was being driven by all kinds of factors. Venezuela was in collapse. We know what's going on in the northern tribal countries. And we know what COVID had done to many of the economies in our region, but also we're seeing folks from all over the world, Chinese, Russians even, obviously Ukrainians, are showing up at the southern border because the legal immigration system was so broken, they thought that was the best way to go about it. And so then we had legislation in the Congress to fix it. And $20 billion specifically for the machinery of immigration, from immigration judges who we are firing, right? To the administrative personnel who do the processing so that the Border Patrol officers don't have to do it themselves. To more Border Patrol agents themselves, because the Border Patrol was being stretched to its limit. They were having a mental health crisis within the Border Patrol. Because when you're working 6 days a week, you're not seeing your family and you're being shipped off to a different part of the region, so you're not coming home every night. You have all the incidences of depression rising, from alcoholism to depression to divorce, all these things we saw at the Border Patrol, and also a higher level of turnover. And so we're trying to address it. And so the same people who were saying, we got to do something about this, then said, no, we can't pass this bill. We can't try and fix the problem. Because if we did that, then we can't campaign on it. And that's why maybe people get really cynical. And that's when people throw up their hands. And so, what we're seeing now, I think, listen, I support a strong and secure border. Always have, always will. My grandfather was doing this long before I was ever born in Brownsville, Texas, right? And I also know, though, that how we treat other people says more about us than them. And so as we go about the process of addressing our immigration system, we have to do consistent with our values so that when we go to a country around the world, that's cheap. When we say to them, we don't like how you're treating this group in your country. We want you to change that, which is what we've done for much of our history. We use our moral standing in foreign policy to tell others, get in line, right? We don't have a leg to stand on when we go to them after we do these things. So then they say, you're just like the Chinese. And they all bet you USA ID. Listen, there's so many reasons other than the actual good the USA ID did, why we, from a national security perspective and from a foreign policy perspective, it's important for us to be doing good things around the world. Because if we don't do it, someone else will step into that vacuum, and then their value system will be the one that those countries follow, right? As in me, I see it as from a foreign policy perspective, as the future is going to be who will influence most of the global south, which is the fastest growing region in the world, which has most of the resources that are necessary for modern society and for where we're going, from rare minerals to whatever you want to point to lithium, all those kinds of things. We're in a battle for the global south, and we're in a battle with sort of a Sino-oppression, Chinese-Russian combination, and we are undercutting every single leg we have to stand on there, including when we do immigration actions that are not consistent with our values.
Yeah, and you mentioned sort of the battle of influence. You also mentioned the price of groceries, another one I think that is specific to Texas. And I don't think that makes a lot of sense, but I'm curious what you're hearing from Texas about the effects of, I don't know if it's 50%, it may have changed in the last 5 minutes, to 80% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, our allies. I understand the logic there. I think the administration, steelmanning the argument, they would say it's somehow protecting American jobs. But we know that this is going to lead to inflation. I'm curious what you're hearing and how can we think about that, and how should Texans think about it as it comes to the effect that it will have on the Texas economy?
If you're an elected official in Texas, you better be against tariffs. We're the number one trade state in the country, man. Like, that's what we do. That's our economy. So if you just are going to say, well, I'm a Republican, so I'm going to go along with this, then forget it. Because that is nonsense. By far our biggest trading partner is Mexico, followed by Canada, followed by China, here in Texas. We have deeply integrated supply chains and manufacturing processes with Mexico and with Canada. I've represented this area for some time, of course, and during the first round of tariffs, someone like a Toyota would call me and say, what are we going to do? They're tariffing all the aluminum and the metal that we need for cars, and then they're going to put a charge on everything that comes across the border. We've got a manufacturing process for the 2100, which we make in San Antonio, Texas, right? That comes back and forth across the border several times before it gets to you as the car you drive around on the streets of Texas, right? We had Lennox Air Conditioning. I'm not naming them specifically from their cases, because I don't want to go into private information, but I'm just saying to the folks who are here, Lennox Air Conditioning, they make air conditioning units all around the country, one of the main manufacturers of that. They have manufacturing both here and in Mexico. It creates jobs here, creates jobs there, helps add stability there as well. All these things work together. And it's just crazy, man, that we would put at risk what for other countries would be a dream. That you have a regional trade process in which you benefit mutually from each other's strengths, and it raises all boats. Now, we needed to make some adjustments to it. So when I first took Congress, I was one of the main people up past the USMCA. Under this current president, who was the president then. And then he's attacking his own trade agreement now, saying it's a terrible agreement. We got the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO to support trade agreement. That's not very common, right? And it's because we're raising border standards in Mexico so they couldn't undercut our borders. Trade agreements do that too. And it was also something that was going to be good for overall business. Business is based on certainty. There's business leaders here who know a lot more about this than I do. But you can't plan month to month when it comes to supply chains or manufacturing. That's not how it works. That's not how really anything works, but certainly in business. You have to have certainty. And so even if you're going to do a tariff, I think most of us would prefer that you have a certainty on what it's going to be, than that is just kind of variable nonsense. But also, to the general's point, explain to the American people why you're doing this. Why are you doing this? What's the rationale? Because the rationale is going to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Well, then why would you put it on and take it off? That doesn't make sense. If the rationale is that we have to go through this transition, which I've heard this argument as well, we have to go through this transition in order to get to the promised land on the other side, which will be the manufacturing dominance of the 1950s. Well, then why would you use it as a tool instead of just saying, well, we got to get there? And so it's eternally inconsistent, right? And that kind of stuff doesn't work on a global stage, doesn't work in global relations, it doesn't work in trade.
I want to zoom out quickly now to more the world stage and the conflicts abroad, and I want to focus specifically on the Senate. One of the roles of Senate is advice and consent, and I think one of the things about foreign policy in the United States is that in many instances personnel is policy. And we saw it's been 2 months, 3 months now, and one of the first roles that the Senate went through, Senator Cruz was part of this, but was vetting the nominees that Trump put forward to lead some of the most important agencies in the federal government, one being obviously the Department of Defense with Pete Hegseth. There was a campaign, in the lead up to the campaign, there was a lot of talk about DUI hires and getting that out of the military. But then, folks like great DEI, confused. That was not intended. But in any case, you have a nominee now leading the Department of Defense who, prior to taking the helm, and not managed a budget north of $50 million. And I think in both of those cases, of sort of nonprofit budgets, were severely mismanaged. People on the board had said this, had a history of, complaints from board members, but also just colleagues that he had worked with, about his conduct on the job. And then we see this week, obviously, the security leak on the signal chain. These guys are texting back and forth about attacking the Houthis in Yemen. And there was a journalist on there, but who knows, or the signal itself as an app has been compromised. I mean, it was cited as the Russian government had somehow compromised that. There was a note that sent out to the Pentagon, I think a week or two ago. It said this before, obviously, this leak came out. Has the Senate really backed away from its advice and consent role? I mean, this is a liability for the United States. I mean, you saw what happened. I mean, how should the Senate think about its obligation, and are they falling down on that job?
General, what would it mean if the Iranians were to be aware of our attack plans on a proxy, 2 hours before, right? The weapon systems that were being used, which units were involved, the exact timing of it. I mean, here's the thing. This is not monopoly money. This is not play people, right? We have men and women in harm's way who have taken that oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and who are there to carry out a mission that was given to them by the President of the United States. They deserve to have national security officials who take and hold the responsibility of the information that could mean their lives with the seriousness that it deserves. Signal is compromised. I don't want to tell folks, but if the Russians wanted to get into your signal, they could. But one of the people on that chain was in Moscow. I was on the Foreign Affairs Committee for 6 years. There are many countries that I would not take my devices to. Some of them friendly. Right, Wally? Because as soon as you land, they're in your device. And so it doesn't matter what app you're using because they're watching your keystrokes. And so that's the reason why we have things like SCIFs, a secure compartmentalized information facility, where you can discuss things. Part of many classified briefings. You can't even take notes because you can't even remember the discussion, right? And listen, when you put amateurs in charge of these jobs, you will get amateur hour, right? You bring in clowns, you get a circus. And I see here folks who are just not serious. And I look back on the first go around and see General Mattis, deeply respected. Everybody thought that good, And obviously, some that we can do this. I saw people, Rex Tillerson, who had served and then had at least a global understanding from his private sector, work. You had John Bolton, serious people, right? I probably wouldn't agree with them on many things, depending on the case, but I knew they were serious. And to me, this whole text chain thing comes back to the United States Senate. It comes back to the Senate. Because almost every person who was on that chain who did the wrong thing, they cleared. Knowing that they were not qualified for the job, you wouldn't give Pete Hesketh in charge of a hot dog stand. Come on, man. You must have raising standards in DOD by lowering the standards for the secretary? Get out of here. Or, Tulsi Gabbard, who we've had serious concerns whether or not she was a Russian plant. She said D&I. And listen, we can go down the list. But the point is that if you have a balance of powers, then it's somebody's elected president. Okay, that's the will of the people. Then they want people to be vetted by the United States Senate. It's their job to make sure we have qualified people in these roles, and they fail in the job. And so this is the first example. There will likely be many that we will see in which some kind of nonsense happened. Because we have people in place who are unqualified, shouldn't be the job in the first place.
And I gotta say, as a former Republican, I haven't said this in a while, but even Mitch McConnell warned us that he was off the beat on this. We had
cocaine, Mitch.
he saw Nixon from a mile.
I'm not in all his memory. I would say,
the last panel really unpacked a lot of the different theaters, and I think I know your perspective on the Ukraine conflict and just the kind of the nonsense that we've heard about the rationale for the United States basically switching sides in that conflict, which is just absurd and shameful. I kind of want to take a step back though and ask you this is one that I struggle with about where we are as a country. I think that the growing pains that we're going through as a nation really are causing, I know a lot of people around the world, but even a lot of people in the United States believe in democracy, to question the constancy and the stick-to-itness of our foreign policy apparatus. It looks, I think our enemies, Russia, China, are betting on the fact that they can, if they just wait us out, they can wait till the next election, and Americans will grow weary, they'll grow tired, and they'll kick out the folks who are saying that we should pursue a particular objective abroad. And that's a real concern when you look at a China that, thinks in centuries, as opposed to just the next 2-year election cycle. And I think that has been exacerbated in large part, not entirely, but in large part by the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and the concerns coming out of that, the frustrations with the long commitment there, and Americans on both sides of the aisle are right to be frustrated with the pursuit of those objectives. And what was just, it was a strategically fraught conflict. The nation committed its resources, its men, for decades to this thing. And I feel that we're still in the shadows of those conflicts. And the American people now have sort of lost touch with sort of the greatest generation idea of America as a beacon, shiny city on a hill. And that, at the end of the day, is a political challenge for the United States. How do you think about that as a public leader? And because you gotta take that into account as you try to get the energies of the American people to trust American leadership in the world and the political leaders that have to reflect that political change. How do you see that challenge? Do Americans, even those who believe in a forceful America, that these on the world stage, do we need to adjust our thinking of what America can be? Or should we just recommit ourselves to what we know America is?
I played with some guys who, if you told them they were going to spend, $170 billion supporting Ukraine, they'd be like, what the hell for? And I'm like, okay, good question. Let's explain why this is in our interest, right? First of all, 70% of the money we spend on Ukraine isn't spent here. In my district, in Mesquite, we opened a new manufacturing plant. What's the howitzer round? Is it 155? Is that what it is? Or about, to build the rounds, creating hundreds of jobs here in North Texas. And tried to make a little bit of a news around it, but didn't get much interest in it. And listen, we failed on that front, in my opinion. Like President Biden failed. If we had a president who was actively out there just explaining to the American people every single day why this was in our interest, I think we would see a different level of support, ongoing support, right? And that's one of the problems we had with the limited communication we were getting out of the President of the United States. Listen, I can just tell you the truth, right? You have to explain to people why this is in their interest. It's explaining to why we do what we do, and we've been doing what we've been doing. Why we've had Pax Americana, right? And this peace that has largely been because of the systems that we've set up and that we've been the anchor of. whether it's NATO, the UN has some issues, of course, but these institutions have kept us out of a world war for longer than we really had in several centuries. And it's because what we do around the world has a rationale behind it. When we help stop HIV/AIDS in Africa, yes, it saves 25 million lives. Thank you, President Bush. It also contributes to stability in Africa so that then the Al-Qaeda branch in Africa has less reach into that community, and then they don't show up with a bomb strapped to themselves in Times Square. It's in our interest for a stable country or for a stable region, or for there not to be an overthrow of a democratically elected government, because then you get military leader or dictator who knows will most likely align with another military leader like a Putin or like a Xi, right? That it's in our interest to do these things, but we've not explained it well enough. And if you looked to me when I was 17 years old at Hillcrest High School here, I wouldn't have understood it either. You need to explain it to me why, even though my mom and I are struggling, we're going to send some money, not much of our overall wealth, but some, to try and contribute to stability and helping people around the globe. They're saying that because of the shuttering of the CID, 1 million to 2 million people more may die. You think that's not going to contribute to instability in those countries? You think there will be some strong man who will think, this is my opportunity to take advantage of this instability? You think there will be some terrorist group that will say, see what they did? They left you. I'll be here for you. Come with me. Radicalize with me. Right? This has an influence on us. But in the American system, Churchill get in jail. Let's say democracy is the worst form of government, except for every other one. Right? And in our system, we have to explain. We have to get out there on the hustings when you're campaigning and say to people, this is why I voted for this aid. When you saw rockets being intercepted over Tel Aviv, know that there was a foreign aid package that came through the Congress that I voted for, that John Colin voted for, that in that case, although apparently he's changing his mind, and that Ted Cruz voted against, right? And that those missiles were intercepted because of the United States, right? Or that when Taiwan is purchasing and preparing to make themselves into what we call porcupine, or military leaders know more about this than I do, but so they can be, what we're trying to do is deter China from doing something stupid. So they have to be strong enough to deter them along with our presence in the Pacific. But that's also, they're buying from us. And that's building our manufacturing base. Most of the material we sent to Ukraine was our old stuff. Then we cleared out. It was still better than the Soviet stuff, right, General and Admiral? But then we were replacing and backfilling with modern stuff, which is actually modernizing our military. And so we have to explain that, though, to people. And if you don't say that, then you just say, you're wasting all your money over there. But people, I think, can also understand the return on investment. And say, oh, actually, I'm putting in more back than what I put in. And that, to me, is what we didn't do.
And in Cruz's defense, he has shown a willingness to defend and even champion aid packages that he voted against. So you're probably going to have to deal with that challenge, because sometimes you can't really know if you voted for it or against it. But I'll finish with one more question, and then we'll open it up to audience questions. So if you have a question, get them ready. I don't want to just go. The personal privilege is just a real political question here. Technically it's a big election cycle coming up in 2026. Governor, gubernatorial race, Senate race, with Senator Colin coming back on the ballot. You ran an outstanding first-time campaign for Senate here in the state. You obviously are involved in the Dallas community, and I know a lot of folks in this room admire your leadership. Can we look forward to seeing you back on the ballot someday? Or what's next for Colin Allred?
Well, right now it's Minecraft. You know what Minecraft is? Okay. I got 2 boys. Cameron turns 4 in 3 days. Jordan just turned 6. And, I didn't know my dad growing up. Many of y'all know that, know my story. And so being a dad has been number one for me. I'm the first member of Congress to ever take return your leave, right? I hate this whole manosphere thing where they kind of think that you should be a bad father. How's that manly? You want to make fun of somebody for taking leave with their kids? Listen, that's the most manly thing you can do. And I'm 41, so obviously I still want to be involved in public service, and I will be. And I'll let y'all know this summer. But what I think is really important is that we not just wait till the election to be activists and to be involved, and not put everything on the election, because there's so much to do every single day. And that's what I want to be involved with right now. And that's, sort of to try and encourage people to get out of your defensive crouch, get off the doom scrolling, and do something in your community. Do anything in your community. I guarantee you'll feel better. Volunteer at the food bank. They always need volunteers. You can go on the website and sign up. They'll take you. And volunteer with your PTA. Get involved. And you'll start seeing and having conversations where you realize, oh, we're okay. We're still who we've always been, right? Politics will come and go, but the fundamentals will stay as long as we protect them. And so that's what I want to encourage everyone to do. That's what I've started to come back out to tell people to do, is to get up, put your shoulders back, put your head up, and be involved.
Who's from the audience, right back there?
Chaos is going on in Washington right now. Why you believe that nowadays Taiwan nasty? What's wrong with that?
So for anyone in here, specialists, why do I believe that China's not down in Taiwan yet? I think that every day, I talked to the president in Taiwan, after I went to Ukraine, and my focus was democracy at home and abroad, and did voting rights here, and also wanted to make sure we protected democracies around the world. And I spoke with President Tsai, who was the president then of Taiwan, and she said, and I don't think I'm revealing anything that shouldn't be said publicly, that every single day, President Xi, as we call her, Xi, is probably making an acclamation. And whenever the equity is reached that he thinks it'll be worth more to him than it'll cost him, that's when he may act. And so our job is to make sure that that balance is never reached, right? That our deterrence is high enough. I know with the Marines at Okinawa, their mission is to be the responders. We have a strategy of strategic ambiguity, right? Which is we don't want the Chinese to know what we're going to do. So they will hopefully think that we'll defend them, the Taiwanese. I do think that what we saw in Ukraine with the global response, particularly the Western response, but also the Asian response from the South Asians, the Japanese in particular, the Australians, that has given Xi a pause. Because China's economy is geared towards selling us things and selling the West things. And so our biggest deterrent, as strong as our military is, as strong as the Navy is, in the Pacific, is our purchasing power and our economies. And the fact that they're too intertwined with us to want to have that completely ripped out. They are not Russia. Russia has an economy that is almost siloed off from the West. China is not. They purposely made themselves intertwined. And so for them, it's a much bigger gamble. But I guarantee you what she is thinking right now is, Trump's making a lot of noise about how he's not going to defend anybody. Maybe this time there won't be a response. And there's a lot of different opinions on what the Chinese will do, but I don't think they'll do a dramatic invasion. I think they'll strangle Taiwan slowly. That's what their goal is. And listen, democracies around the world are in trouble. All around the world, we've seen a rash of coups in Africa, in the Sahel in particular. People might think it doesn't matter, it does. And we're going to reap what we've been implanting 10, 20 years from now. And when you see that instability and that chaos, it'll be because of things that have happened during this period, right? And so my fervent hope is that President Trump and his team will continue to message extremely strongly that Taiwan is off limits. That if you move on Taiwan, we will move on you in every way we can. Economically, perhaps militarily, and that it's not worth the risk, right? And I just haven't seen enough to make me as comfortable as I would like to have been about that. Questions?
I mean, as you talk with the nasty, when that democracy is a real problem, I'm of the belief that a lot of people voted by the government that we can't agree on policy here. We can't speak to a lot of the country. There's a whole different reality where you get the information and who there. So what do you say to somebody who has had by faith to agree, or who would be willing to embrace isolation as tendency? What is your message to them? How do you even work? How do you bring that?
Yeah, so the question pretty much in here was about, and people tell me if I'm not stating it correctly, who've kind of lost faith in democracy, who maybe have a different set of facts that they've been ingesting, and what do we say to them? You know, and there's always going to be people that you can't reach, and you understand that. You still try, but there's always going to be people who are going to be unreceptive. I think that there's a different group, though, that we are always trying to communicate to the most, which is folks who are wondering and who aren't so certain and haven't really seen the system work that well. You know what I mean? If you are only a defender of the status quo and the status quo hasn't worked, and people are like, well, this doesn't seem so great to me. So instead of saying to them, the system is perfect, restore the system, maintain the system, tell it to Port like in South Dallas, right? That shouldn't be our message. The message should be, listen, the system isn't perfect, but we've been perfecting it. Help us make it better. We can go somewhere else with this, right? We are constantly evolving and growing and changing. And just in a short period of time, we've already seen massive changes. From my father's generation, in which, so it's segregated schools, so, me being the first African American to represent my congressional district, right? So, to me, it's not about defending the status quo and saying the system is so good and the justice system is so fair. That doesn't ring true to a lot of people. But that, on the flip side, though, it can't be, well, the justice system is unfair, so we're going to use it to go against our enemies, right? But instead of to say, you're right, it does need changing. Let's go change it together. And the way you do that is going to be by voting, by being involved in your community, and not giving up and checking out. Because when you do that, that's when the system will set it on you, right? There's people who say, on K104 here, in the morning period, say, B.I.G., believe in God, because he believes in you. Well, you have to believe in our political system, because if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. You know what I mean? Like, they're making decisions about you. And so, I am something that I feel strongly, is that we cannot be, whether you're running for office or whether you're trying to talk to someone in your life, we cannot be the defenders of the status quo when it hasn't been working. We have to be the defenders of the system that we can make better together, and one that, with your involvement, can be better.
I think we've done a couple of these dinners now, and every time we've struck just by the fact that I think Principles First is maybe one of the only grassroots organizations where we don't really need a moderator. We could just field audience questions the whole night. We'd have a fascinating discussion. So thank you, everyone, for these incredible questions. No pressure, but you're up next.
I spent 14 months in various schools to study is up there in Africa, Akarunism, that's a bad wizard, the like bullshit did it. Because I think that's the actual receipt year in the top of Trump, and then we have notes. And the thing that fear me the most, all the way long, not the things that could be undone in 2 years, but the chance for you are going to do Congress, and I give up the backbone. But the dismantling of the fundamental structures of our government is happening right now. USAID, to your point, what are the drivers of immigration to this country? You know, refugees that come to silence these seekers. As exactly the kind of stuff USAID does. He walks it, he ends it, just ends it. And Congress is enmity. And so I'm terrified about the dismantling of those structures that are in place to protect us. Exactly the ones that we have been told to go to. There is talk about go to your representatives. Okay, be your bars. Right now, our entire foundation to our government of aid is dismantled. We have had a horses that God for these other folks who are no speak or face bodies stepping up. Up here is fundamentally dangerous in this country, and I feel like because, frankly, I know a generation that grew up during the Cold War, we were told to merit it different. We are so robust, everything's gonna be fine, get checks and balances. That is all going to hell right now. Why we did I ready to show up for the 2026 election, the whole thing. But right now, I want to do something more than wave a sign. And we have somebody not elected, not confirmed by Congress, nothing. When you rush off board, there's fundamental structures about having, and I wanted to, so no pressure. But that, I really like talking about it.
Such a, you're right, Heath. Great statement, good question. And LBJ would say, any jackass can knock down a bar. But it takes a carpenter to build one, right? It's easy to destroy stuff. It's easy to break up a vase, but you couldn't have made that vase. You know what I mean? And the government is like that. Let's go out to waste, fraud, abuse. When they first said that, to be honest, I was thinking about running out of bed when they first announced they were going to send, okay, let's do that. Because, I worked in the Obama administration. I know that we have agencies that are using computers that have Windows 95 on them. So let's modernize the government. Let's improve efficiency. Let's bring in, yes, some AI in certain areas so that you can get the things more quickly than a person could. I used AI to respond to all my emails today. If I want to go, if you got an email from me, it was AI, really. Okay? Let's improve efficiency. Let's find fraud and waste. You don't do that when you fire the inspector generals. You can't. Or if you're IRS, you don't have the personnel to stop tax cheats, then all of a sudden now we have a huge issue because we have less revenue coming in than expected. And so you see this huge revenue shortfall in what was expected. That's going to go to the debt ceiling as well, and a whole bunch of issues. And it's not about that, obviously. And to me, democracies have to be about accountability, where elected officials and appointed officials based on that election, and then it's obviously by the Senate, by the Congress. You do not have unelected, masters of something in a democratic system, because they are not accountable to the people. This is where the Congress has to step up. This is why I think the funding fight should have been about this. Instead of waiting to the last second and saying, well, if we have to shut it down, they'll like that. No, it was weeks ago that we should have been drawing the battle line on that. And saying, this has to stop, or you're not getting the votes to make sure that this continues. There's going to be another deadline coming up in September for government funding. They have to draw the battle line there and say, you've got to stop this, or you're not going to get our votes. The number one call I used to get to my office wasn't about the hot issue of the day. It was about Social Security. Nobody's answering the phones at SSA. Or about veterans issues. Nobody's answering the phone of the VA. You know who they're firing when they fire all this up to the VA? Veterans. It's veterans who want to serve veterans. Whoever delivers your mail tomorrow, you probably should thank them for their service. They're probably a veteran. A lot of people who serve then go into government service, and I'm speaking of the choir here, but because they are mission-oriented people. And so they saw their mission ending in the military, but now they're going to join a different mission. My grandfather was one of those people, right? And so when you're going through this roughshod firing people, you're firing a bunch of veterans. And where's the humanity in that? Where's the effort to make it efficient? It's not that. This is not Twitter. You can't just fire everybody and, the website doesn't work anymore. No, people expect their government to work. And to me, that continues to be part of our responsibility, is that when it doesn't, it's to tell people why it's not happening. And we do have a developing oligarchy in this country, in which the richest people in the world are controlling far more than we've ever had, probably in the history of our country, particularly now when you have the richest man in the world, apparently with control over every single government agency. That's not our system of government. But we have seen it in other places. We've seen it in one in particular, in Russia. Well, the way you make money is by being close to the leader. You might fall out of a window every now and then, but for a few years it'll be good. Right? We are not that. It's too ingrained in us to not be that. That's why I think we feel the friction. I think that's why we all feel that friction. It's not just politics I'm talking. It's not conservative, liberal. No, it's not politics. It's that it's not American. It's not our system. And that's why I think we have to use every single day to, if you can't get your elected official to do something, then be part of the solution locally. Because there's going to be a lot of need in our communities.
We'll maybe have time for one more. We're gonna do a rapid fire. Or maybe back and fire. We'll take rapid fire. We'll do a rapid fire last round, and we'll just take 2 or 3, and then we'll respond to a bunch.
This is a bit off that. So when they said they want to get rid of waste product use, what they're doing is this is a different priority. So PEPFAR, right, originally got scrapped, President Bush's mayor. So what they're saying, they're taking waste, fraud, and abuse. In reality, it's just what President Trump doesn't believe in this administration. Full disclosure, I served in the last Trump administration. I was in NOAA. I came on and did course Vice President Harris in the fall because I voted so strongly against what was happening. I'm now watching 5 old colleagues at the National Weather Service and no difference. Coming out in high and accept that I think we need to change the conversation away from we all want to remove waste started abuse. That these are just priority changes. These are not getting rid of any of this. So we've got to change that. We also see this. We also have to move away from focusing on the federal employees that are impacted, which I feel horrible about. We have to talk about the impacts of every one of us in this room. 40 meteorologists in charge of those 127 weather forecast offices are gone. Your most senior weather forecast. And the same began to be at a massive storm like this very often. That's where I think this one, you will have to start to talk about it from that perspective and taking the personal emotion out. I had to sign up with all my Democrat, other NOAA calls directors. So you have a NOAA call seat where we're out there trying to ID this information one day at a time. But I vote see you, my electee voted in his first election, and he voted for you. We are a Republican family for the last 40 years.
There's 2 Mr. Allred, thanks for running against the rules and running to do a great concert. Fast as I love you, fun. It's just something as a comment. I think everybody just recognize that democracy is sick and needs significant help. And someone who disagrees Congress, how much of your colleagues, your Congress, do they understand how sick our democracy is? And how accepted do you think they are to actually enacting so legislative reform to improve democracy? Like, what is the breaking point where it's like, I know that maybe this is not in my personal interests because I'm a member of one of the two big parties or whatever, but where are we getting to the point where, like, our elected officials can, like, put the interests of the country and all of us and themselves to try to help and improve our bond?
And there was one more, and
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on something that he said earlier about communication. I am from Madison Avenue. I did all the big campaigns for Madison Avenue for many years. And something that I saw, particularly with the Democrats, and I voted for it, but I was a Myers Republican before. I'm going to hand it to Trump. And I was in New York when he was doing The Apprentice. I was even called to work on that show. One thing he and his cadre understand are sound bites and messaging and central casting. Because not all voters are as educated as some of us in this room, and they play to the lowest common band. And that's the theme that we have in advertising. And your message doesn't get across to the lowest common band, we're not delivering and selling our message. So something that I think all of us feel collectively that we wake up and we're petrified. We want people in Congress instead of, we see what's happening. We feel Nazi Germany coming to get the mere not conspiracy theorists. We have to act now. We don't count the luxury of 2 years. We don't count the luxury to, let's believe in our system. Our system's fragile, and we get that, and we want to protect that. We're all joining together with talking today. I'm like, what brought you here? What brought you here? Oh, I worked in the Senate for 20 years, and I did this, and I was a Republican, and I was a blue Democrat. But one thing that we're all seeing us come together is we are country first, and we have got to protect this. And I already volunteer, but I feel I need to do a heck of a lot more to help those in office to understand we're here. What do you need? I am so jealous of Project 2025 because they took all the last years and had a plan. Where is our strategy? What are we doing behind the scenes? All you smarty pants, all you guys that talked on the panel, what's the strategy? What's our Project 2011 to get this going? What are the levels? You guys know the levers. You're an attorney. You guys are generals. And what are the levers that we have at our disposal to make this change to turn it around now?
thank you. I just want to make if you parked in the garage, you can't get in it at 9 p.m. You can still get out of it after 9 p.m. So those folks will get out of it. You won't be locked into the garage after 9 p.m. But we're wrapping it up again soon anyways. But Colin, I don't know
That's the last thing I'll say. The biggest divide I saw in Congress wasn't ideological. It was folks who understood what was happening now versus folks who came from a very different generation. Now, that's not by age. It's whether you understood the fight that we're in now or whether you thought it might be like it had always been. I have Republican colleagues who I like a lot, who've been there a long time, and who think, oh, this is just politics. This is just the back and forth. It's like, no, there's something different going on. And I have Democratic colleagues who I like a lot, who think, well, we'll just come back to the midterm, and we'll just seek the ground until then. They're dealing with it with rules of a game that's not being played anymore, right? And so to me, that's what we have to have, is we have an urgency at the moment, a new generation of leadership that says, we understand what the fight is. It's not to be specifically partisan or ideological, but one in which hopefully, as a patriotism, believe in the Constitution, believe in the country, and we can do it together.
Just to close, and I just want to come back to this question of what can we do? Because I completely agree 2026 is too long a wait. And so one of the things that we're going to do our very best at Principles First, and I encourage you to, if before you leave, talk to Bob here at the center table, talk to me or Brittany. Let us know that you want to be engaged in it. We'll obviously send this all in an email out if you register today. We've got that, and we'll send this information out. But I think one of the things that we can do now is keep showing up in numbers and frequently and often, and in ways that will get the attention of the media and the members of Congress, because this is what scares them. When they see the write-up on this, when they see the videos and the comments, and this is what gets out there and people see, and they think that they have the monopoly on crowds of people in fields and in stadiums. And that is the lifeblood of politics, whether we like it or not, because as you say, they figure that out. They figure out how to do the theater of politics. And the Democrats have been terrible at this, but also the normie Republicans have been bad at this. We're going to get better at it. Okay, we're starting to get better at it, and Principles First is focused like a laser on this. Because I can tell you, I know that this room could be 1,000 people, just the people that you guys know. And there's 1,000 to 5,000 more just in Dallas that those people know. And all it takes is showing up and doing it. Let's do a dinner like this in Dallas and the DFW. Let's do it in Austin. Let's do it in Houston. Let's do it in San Antonio, El Paso. I mean, let's do it, and keep showing up. And I guarantee you host dinners like this over the next 6 months and all of those seats, everyone damn sure pay attention to what we're talking about here. So that's what I would say is help us do that. That's the vision of what we're doing, and convening speakers like this and leaders like this under this banner. That's how it happens. Before we'll vote, we'll donate, we'll support candidates like Colin and Ron. I mean, we'll do all that. But in the meantime, I think the democracy, the civic society of showing up like this and drowning out the craziness on the fringes is one of the most important imperatives of civic engagement that we could possibly do. That's my pitch for Principles First. Thank you so much for coming. It's great to see all of you. Thank you.